Hi, I am Gabriel Dirksen, and this is my Module 9 case study for AEP 855 Educational Leadership. Summary of the facts. The facts. Richard Inman is a principal, a Southside original, and a Rocket Junior High School. There's about 900 students in this school. He is working on building a relationship with the Southside kids. He is originally a Southside kid from the community himself, and he likes to stay late playing basketball, especially with a boy named James. So he's really trying to mold and form relationships that with the kids that are causing trouble, quote unquote, in the building. James is a troubled kid dealing with fighting and tardies himself. The principal has to deal with a few issues with James of tardies, but he's really trying to help build those strong relationships with those students that are hard to reach. Another student that's involved in the story, in the case study, is David Ramos. He's an honor student and well known for behaving around the school. A teacher caught James passing something to David. The teacher thought it could possibly have been drugs. It was a real sneaky situation, and the teacher involves the principal in the situation itself. Boys were brought in, and an officer, the school resource officer, were brought in to talk about it, and the boys were passing brass knuckles from one bag to the next. James was handing it off to David. At the school, it is a felony possession of a prohibited weapon, 45 days in the district's disciplinary alternative education program, the DAP. And another fact of that, the principal Richard did not. He didn't fill out correct papers for David. Only James was found guilty. Section 2, legal and ethical issues. So, a legal issue that arose, students possessing brass knuckles in the school. It was handled by the resource officer, and the principal really didn't have anything to do with the consequences besides the filing of the paperwork. Another legal issue is not filing out the appropriate forms, and so with him not filling out the appropriate forms, he was professionally reprimanded, Richard was, for not turning in David. The district's disciplinary alternative education program. I put that as a legal issue because it has to go in there it has to be gone through the right commands to get to be in there for 45 days. Fair and just punishment. I think some questions arise: is 45 days for every situation? Is that legal to do? Is that the right thing? Is it a fair and just punishment? And so that is something I thought of. Ethical issues. Building a relationship with students. Not writing David up for the possession of the brass knuckles. I think that's something to do. The principal, Richard Inman, didn't think it was ethically responsible because David was forced to do it by verbal consent from James, or he would get beat up if he didn't take the brass knuckles. And so that was an ethical issue that arose. Are the school policies ethical? So I think it brings up a good issue. Is there something that should be done for David that might not be as severe as 45 days in there, but is there an issued policy that it could be tweaked a little bit, and maybe out of school suspension, maybe an ISS for possessing those, because he knows it's not right to have those on school grounds. Some ethical issues. I also think, I do think Mr. Inman did a great job of informing the parents. He told both parents of the situations. James's parents wanted his parents wanted him thrown into that educational program for 45 days, no questions asked. And David's parents were shocked, concerned, confused because David really never gets in trouble. But Richard Inman, did the right thing of informing parents. I think that could be an ethical issue if you didn't inform parents, so it's always good to inform stakeholders and community members. Synthesize the Statement. Richard, the Rocket Junior High principal, is dealing with an ethical decision when two boys were caught exchanging an illegal weapon. Having fair and just consequences is causing some discussion in ethical decision making. So, we are going to consider the facts. People involved is Richard Inman. He is the principal. Southside students. James and David Ramos are the two students that are directly involved in this case study. Teachers, administrators, and parents. Places. It's happening at Rocket Junior High. It is in Richard's office, the principal's office, and those are the places that it occurs at. Programs. So programs that are involved. The district's disciplinary alternative education program. Another program that would be involved is ethical decision-making of students in disciplinary action, handling that with being an administrator, and then 45-day suspension for possession of an illegal weapon on school grounds. Section 5, prioritize the information. Have all actions of all students been taken into consideration? Something I thought that the principal could have done better was maybe bringing in one student at a time and the resource officer. So just bringing in each individual. He brought everybody in at once, and then some things happened, and Richard Inman had some ethical issues with not punishing David. So I think if he would have brought in each student one at a time and talked to them and to see what happened, maybe they would confess and we could have handled this situation a little differently. Has the principal contacted all appropriate stakeholders and administrators? I think with being a teacher here and my principal, I think if there was a legal weapon on school grounds, I think it would have been helpful if Mr. Inman could have contacted maybe some administration on his own, maybe an assistant principal, superintendent, if he could have brought in somebody else into the situation to help with decision making. Could the actions be damaging to the community? I think coming from a small community here, if there was a gun brought to school on our grounds or brass knuckles, the whole town would be talking of it. So, making the right decision here is very important to make an example for what happens if this rule is broken in the future. So there is that to be concerned about. Counseling with students, considering talking with other staff members. So I think those are some other things Mr. Inman could have done differently. Section 6. So I had a lot of options I thought out here. The first option was do nothing. Take the formal reprimand as Richard Inman. Don't file the papers for David. Stick with the gut decision that Richard made, and James owning up to the decision. James did say he made David take the brass knuckles, or he was going to beat them up. The resource officer took him into handcuffs, and they had the 45-day suspension, and then he did nothing with David, so David got up really scot-free because James forced him to do it, so they put all the blame on James. Option 2 is write up both boys for possession of legal weapon on school grounds, suspend both boys for the 45 days to an alternative school, discuss the actions with parents and teachers. I think this is by the textbook example of this decision, because both boys were in possession of the brass knuckles. David should have gone right to a teacher and told him if he knew he was possessing that, and James was in the wrong for bringing it to school. So I think by book, you could penalize both boys and have harsh consequences. Option 3, conference with each student one-on-one, see if David would confess to having it before James takes the blame. Collaborate with the parents and staff and stakeholders for all appropriate and ethical decisions. Middle ground punishment for David. See if there were a clause or something you could do instead of just the harsh 45 days. So, option 1, the pros is James owned up to having the brass knuckles. David was guilty by force, so David was just caught in the wrong because he was forced to do it and didn't want to get beat up. Richard has written an official reprimand for not putting David on the papers. So in that situation, Mr. Inman would be dinged, and it would look bad on his resume if he was not owning up and telling the truth about David having to possess that when James made him. Option 2, the pros, was both boys are guilty of possession of the illegal decision of the. Both boys were guilty of it. They both had it. It was a legal decision by the handbook. So they just followed the book to the rules, and both boys were in possession, so they would have to give both boys 45 days. The con is David is an honor student and not known to be in trouble with the principal, so I think his parents would have a lot of issues, and other people in the school, it could cause a little bit of an uproar. Option 3, finding an ethical decision and navigating it with thorough detail, considering all factors and conferencing with all people involved separately, I think would really help in this situation. Cons, stakeholders and parents might be upset. David's parents might be upset that if David is in trouble. No ethical decision clearly explained in the handbook, and so that would be something to look for down the road, is maybe a change in the handbook policy. Section 8 would be choosing option 3. Option 3 is the best option. It's an ethical and well thought out plan and thorough decision. It promotes fair and just consequences. Collaboratively work with parents, staff, and stakeholders. I think in this plan, if Mr. Inman would collaborate with each student individually, with the resource officer, contact his administration, and work with the other students involved, he could get to a more thought out decision. Implementing. Conference with David and James and the school officers in that order. I think if you talk to James first, James is an honest student, and he's going to find out what really did happen, because that story was never told. Did David get these handcuffs from James because he knew James was a mean guy of the school, and did David really want to beat somebody up so he got brass knuckles? I think David would tell the truth if he was put in that situation. Then you could talk to James, and then you could see and talk to the school officer, because the school officer really just made the decision and walked out with James. So I think if he would have conference with each person individually and compile the facts before he made a decision, would really help, instead of being aggressive with the decision and just making it on the spot with all three of those people in the office. Involve stakeholders or other administration if needed. Give ethical and just consequences for students' actions. I think that's something that should be looked up in the school's handbook. Is there other things that could be done? Can a lesser decision be made by the principal? Because David should be in some punishment because he knowingly had the brass knuckles, so he was in the wrong in a situation. If James put him in his bag, he should have gone right to a teacher and confessed. File out paperwork that includes both boys involved. Do the ethical thing that keeps the facts straight and not put your job in jeopardy for the sake of a student's reputation. I know Mr. Richard Inman had some hard feelings about David being such a nice guy. He didn't want to get David in trouble, so he kept his names off the paper. I think it's okay to say he is a good person, but he did make a mistake, so those papers should be filed. But I do also agree with Richard that the 45 days is a harsh decision if James truly did force him to take those brass knuckles in his bag. So there's many things of ethical decision making that the school needs to look into their policies, and there's some other things that Richard Inman could have done to help the decision making progress and not get so emotionally involved to make quick, hesitant decisions when all three people were in their office. So taking your time to unfoil that plan and to thoroughly look and dig through the situation before you make it, because that could affect community members. It could get around town, and you want to make sure you made the right choice in this case. So I think that's why decision 3 was the best choice. So thank you very much. I enjoyed this case study. It was fun to dig through it, and this course was fun. Thank you very much.